Ladies and gentlemen, children of all wages, welcome back to the show. And sorry that I have been gone for a little longer than I was expecting to. I missed last week's show. Let me turn off my monitor here, my external monitor. That's better. I unfortunately had a very busy week last week, so I missed last week's shows. Obviously, I try to do 2 per week, the recap of the previous week and on to the next one. I know the couple weeks before last week, it was really only one show and doing the recaps and the look-aheads to one show before beginning. I apologize that I missed last week, the post-Civil War recap and Penn State look-ahead. But things just got a little too crazy last week. I had 3 different clients that I had to do some work for last week. And one of the clients was a little bit more involved in the video editing. And I say involved, not like they were involved, but the process took longer than normal. And the work itself was more involved to do than just sort of piecing things together and putting things together for the client. So there were some changes, re-edits and revisits and revisions and all that good stuff that took place last week. And also my business partner often rents my camera from me. And right now I'm only down to 1 camera because I'm rebuilding my inventory here in the studios, if you will. And so he took my only camera for 3 days, and 2 of those 3 days were the days that I would normally do a show. And I picked 7:30 or post 7:30 right now because I did not want to get in the way of Sports Chat 503's live stream that he has on Tuesdays. Like I said, I'm not trying to necessarily compete with him. So for those of you out there that watch Sports Chat 503, he was my lead-in today. Maybe next week I'll be his lead-in next week. Who knows? Like I said, I'm trying to be more consistent with the time and the days and actually going live for those things. But in the meantime, big win over the Beavers. I guess you can call it big win. I guess big in terms of the gap. I think all the things that were and sort of needed to be discussed against the Beavers have already been said by many others and those that have better access to sports radio than me. But my takeaway was that all around solid performance. I think better than against Northwestern. Again, Northwestern had some kind of weird vibes. A lot of it, but a lot of it had to do with the sort of crazy weather that was kind of thrown in there before the game. Even though the game itself was sunny, it was still kind of as many Oregonians know, sometimes a heavy rain and a storm doesn't go away for a couple days and it's still kind of sloppy. Turf and all that good stuff for about around a day after the actual storm is happening. So the performance to get the Beavers, I think, was all around better. The big macro picture, Oregon played very solid run defense. That was nice to see. The flip side of that was obviously the drive that the Beavers actually scored a touchdown. They ran well on Oregon, but again, there's also difference in the analysis here is micro and macro. So on that micro, one drive, not so great. Macro, great. And the score sort of reflected that. And Beavers played better on their in terms of their standards, or at least had they been playing previously. And obviously in that first quarter when it was 7-7, it was like, here we go. And again, it's a rivalry game. I know a lot of people don't like the rivalry anymore or whatever. I discussed that on the last show. But a lot of people don't want the rivalry, and because they think that talent gap is way too wide. And some Beaver fans as well believe that, Oregon State's basically a borderline FCS school at this point. Again, I'm one of those people that still think it can keep going. It's still a little weird that it is in September. Maybe they can do some rescheduling later to do that. But again, I don't think you should get rid of the game, period. It's one of, if not, I think it was the second longest standing rivalry in the country. It's got a lot of history to it, and there can still be history to be made. And even during that 3 to 4 minute window that the Beavers gave a scare, that's why I said, even no matter how bad each team is, you never overlook rivalry games, because there's just some extra juice there for rivalry games that if they weren't rivals, then yeah, sure, it could be an absolute decimation. So that was basically my overall takeaway, the Beaver game, but that's way past due. But this last weekend, I just witnessed just some all-around good football. I mean, over the course of this last busy week, the final tally of the busyness that happened was Friday. Friday night, I went out and shot the Montgomery High School down in Chula Vista versus Mission Bay football game on Friday night, and that game ended up 21-20 score, and it came down to a missed 2-point conversion, a stop on Mission Bay's front. Mission Bay won 21-20, and that was just a really good game. And again, the idea sort of was that Mission Bay had a bit of a higher talent gap than Montgomery, even though Montgomery's kind of been a rising team in the leagues the last couple years or so. They're not as bad as they once were, we'll say, and they put up a good fight. And so that was just sort of kicking off good football this weekend for me personally. I hope you guys don't mind my high school football chats here. Maybe I'll do that every week. I'll just start off with how the high school football game went that I covered on Friday, and then we move on to the Ducks. Because here's the thing, for me, I'm not really like huge on I sort of have the same philosophy as Sports Chat 503. Ryan, go give him a follow and subscribe. You probably do more than, you probably already do, and it's dumb that I'm even giving him a shout out, but because I'm a nobody. But those guys who are playing on the field on Fridays will likely be playing for somebody on Saturdays, at least in this area. Now, I grew up in Oregon, and I played during the area where really the only D1 talent that ever ended up being anything was an opposing player named Dante Rosario. And I got lucky where I just basically got into high school right after he left for Oregon. So I lived in the Mid-Valley area. Portland is the place in Oregon that usually has the talent that usually goes D1, but even then it's still way more rare than somewhere down here in Southern California. Julian Sayed is the primest example right now. He played at Carlsbad High School. I covered a couple of his games his senior year when he was still committed to Alabama right before he transferred. Brandon Arrington was a 5-star that was on the lookout for Oregon this year. He ended up committing to Texas A&M. He plays over on the east side of the county here. And obviously 100 miles north of me, you got the LA area. Where you have Bellflower, California. I've been there a few times at St. John Bosco, and guys like Mateo comes from there, and many others. And then also you got Mater Dei up there, aside from the Mater Dei down here in San Diego, where C.J. Verdell came to Oregon from, the one down here. So there's just a lot of D1 talent down here, and so it's sort of a sneak peek into the future sometimes. So if you like the high school chats, maybe I'll get into it at the top of every show or just over the course of the shows, especially on live streams, because I feel like eventually the live streams will be more longer formats than any pre-recorded show. And for those of you that actually want to join and chat, you leave your comments down below on the chat, and then we can talk football and maybe high school football and all that other good stuff too at the same time. So why not? This show will be ever evolving. It's not stuck to a particular format. So if you don't like it, we can move forward from there. And then after Friday, though, we hit the game of the hour for Duck fans on NBC Sports, the buttoned-up high society sports production, apparently, versus everyone else, the white trash sports productions. Prime time on NBC, night game, whiteout at Beaver Stadium. Still trying to figure out after all these years why it's called Beaver Stadium. The Penn State Nittany Lions. I had to look up what the hell a Nittany lion in particular is. Apparently it's a mountain in the area, and there's lions that live up there. So, bing, bang, boom, done. It's kind of like why the Ducks call themselves the Ducks. There's a lot of ducks in Eugene. I used to feed them. I think at Emerald Park. Anyway, the Nittany Lions play the Oregon Ducks. Number 3, Penn State. Number 6, Oregon. And that just was a really fun game to watch, just in general. As a football fan, as a college football fan, as a Duck fan, obviously, we came out with the double overtime win off a Dylan Thieneman interception. But even if the Ducks lost or whatever, that would have been still a fun game as it played out over the course of time. And then in the rest of college football, you had Alabama win 24-21 versus Georgia. You had Virginia upsetting Florida State on Friday. So just all around good football, basically the whole weekend. There were a couple good NFL games, but I don't really count the NFL at this point. I got to say, I agree with Troy Aikman from the clip that I saw. It's just bad football, bad product. I haven't really watched it very much in a long time. And mainly it's because of the commercials. And I know college football is catching up on that, but still, there's still sort of that regional pride with college football still. But I did sort of catch a couple of NFL games like the Chargers, Colts, and the Broncos, Jets. Was it Jets? No, that was Miami Jets. Bengals. See, I barely remember. But I wanted to watch Bo Nix and Justin Herbert play in particular. That's going to mainly be the reason why I watch NFL games at this point, is to watch the Pro Ducks. But let's get to the Penn State-Oregon game. Just a really great game. Obviously, you have the whiteout, the pomp and the circumstance, the loud crowds, and Oregon in particular handled that absolutely incredibly. I really don't really have words for it, honestly. I know I don't really have the gift of gab, if you will. I say a lot, but I'm trying to work on that. But anyway, the Ducks just, I know there's some detractor fans, the crazy crap talkers on Twitter, that say, oh, it wasn't as loud as Autzen and kind of talking smack. And some people were measuring the decibels. But the thing is, though, with a game like this, and of course why it became sort of it's still a big win, obviously. I'm not trying to sort of downplay anything. I'm just saying the reason why it had sort of a big game, almost postseason type of feel, was the pageantry and the pomp and circumstance that surrounded it, with things like the whiteout, and the Penn State fans take a lot of pride in them being sort of the 12th man style home field advantage bringers. So it is a big deal, even accounting, I guess, for the shit talkers, that Oregon handled that very, very well. They only had 2 false start penalties the entire game. And those 2 came from tight ends, Jamari Johnson and Kenyon Sadiq, and sort of relatively early in the game. The offensive line had 0 false start penalties. The procedural penalties were, like the false starts, the illegal man downfield. I hate that penalty, honestly. The illegal man downfield, it's so stupid. Don't get me started on that at this point. But, those procedural sort of big mistake, non-gameplay penalties were kept to a minimum, and then false starts in particular, 0. And that's huge. I mean, honestly, it really is. And if you watch the broadcast of the game, you had Todd Blackledge go through sort of the process of the silent count that Oregon was doing, from one of the plays that they ran, and just how dynamic and intricate and detailed that what really goes into that silent count. And people sort of take it for granted. And granted, when you're under center, it's a little bit less complicated because, at least when I played, you have the quarterback under center and with his hands under center. And then if it was a silent count, he would just move his hands up. So he'd basically, kind of violate the center's gooch a little extra hard to let the center know, oh, that's snap time. Center snaps, everyone else goes. And there might be some shoulder taps or hip taps as well from the guards and the tackles during the under center silent counts, but you can get away with the silent count under center just by doing that. Now, a shotgun or a pistol or just non-under the center formations, you can't really do that. There's no other giveaway as time to snap the ball other than if, the rest of the line was staring at the center and watching him snap it and then going. But then again, if you have a miscommunication with your quarterback, you might snap it at a terrible time, cause a fumble, whatever, what have you, bobbled snap, so on and so forth. So you have to have that quarterback five or so yards behind the center, and the quarterback letting the lineman know he's ready for the snap from the get-go. Quarterback's reading the defense. Then the offensive line has to communicate with each other based on the quarterback's reads and their reads, and then timing the snap. So there's just a lot more that goes into it when you're not under center, and maybe having to change the play as well. So Oregon handled that phenomenally. I mean, that is, even if you had 1 or 2 false starts from the offensive linemen, I would call that a pretty big win on the day, considering. Shout out first, we'll just, in the name of good sportsmanship, shout out Penn State. They played a great game as well, and they very easily could have stolen that game. So, but it wasn't. I would say reading the tea leaves of guys like George Reister, based on the stats and just kind of how the game went, I would agree that it was. If you don't look at the box score, if you're not a box score watcher and a score watcher, that was a dominant performance by Oregon. And I know that a lot of people argued in the 2011 BCS championship game, Auburn versus Oregon, that even though the game came down to a last-second field goal, that Auburn kind of dominated that game. And while I don't really agree with that, I can see their argument. So you don't have to have a 56-3 game to be dominant in the game, is what I'm basically trying to say. That's sort of what happened with Oregon. Oregon in the first half, here's the thing with these games. I mean, this is just one of those games. You got two top 10 teams. One team, obviously, the Ducks, they're on the road against Penn State with an extreme home field advantage. This isn't going to be a shootout. See, and here's the thing, and here's the reason why I have problems with people who do like score predictions, because they're always like 48-45, this team. And it's like, what's the batting average of that? Honestly, anytime someone says, oh, this is going to be a shootout, it never is. Either an offense is having a really off day, the defenses are having an amazing day, or both. So that's why I really find score predictions super useless. Absolutely, completely useless. Less useless is predicting who wins, obviously. But again, I would still put in the Venn diagram of useless, I would still put predictions as a whole. I think it's better to sort of say who you think will win than outright making a prediction. Because one, unless you're betting on the game, no one's here to come give you a check. Ed McMahon's not showing up at the door to give you a check if you win a prediction. And if you lose, you get ridiculed immensely by everyone telling you you're a moron. So what's it's all risk, no reward. You get, I don't know, you stroke your ego a little bit for 5 minutes, because after that 5 minutes you're on to the next week anyway. So it's like that just doesn't always compute with me, the whole prediction culture, if that's how you want to phrase the whole thing. Now, I get when you're talking smack, you're going to, predict or, say that your team's going to win. I understand that aspect of it. But just outright predicting is dumb. And I say things like, I lean, and I did before the game, I was leaning towards Penn State winning the game. But I also really didn't think the Ducks were just going to roll over. So it was just one of those things. On paper, that's really all you can go with in the preseason. And the hype that was built around Penn State, and the sort of under the radar that Oregon was going with. The thing with Penn State and why they got that hype, though, is because they had a lot of returning people on their roster versus Oregon who didn't. So in a way, there was less questions about Penn State this season than Oregon, because these players have been seen playing before and playing in certain situations and scenarios. Now, you could take that what you will with Drew Aller, who his track record has shown that my dog agrees. Little Lemmy agrees. Sorry, he made a nice squeaky noise. The Drew Aller who's sort of shown what he sort of does in certain games and situations. But the assumption was whether or not we were sold a sort of snake oil on this, we were sort of sold, oh, these are sort of fluky happenings. Not really, not flukes, but this year, his third year starting, he's developed to a point, and he's continuing to develop and improve over the last few years that he's played. This is the big push, the big roster. They got him receivers, even though Tyler Warren left. They got him in the situation to succeed. Now he's going to go ball out versus the other past couple years where the track record hasn't been so great. That was sort of the selling point against those arguments versus Penn State like that, and Big Game James and all that, was, well, this is the year the monkey gets off the back. And people bought it because a lot of times that's happened before with many different programs, teams, coaches, players. And it's certainly possible because it's happened plenty of times. And again, any given Saturday or Sunday, anything can happen. So people weren't necessarily super skeptical about it. No one really had any reason not to be. So in this case, Oregon had more questions, though, because there was a lot of freshmen coming in. And Dante Moore was finally making a real first-year start at Oregon and in his college career because he got sat after 5 games at UCLA, and everyone had UCLA to go off of in the preseason. So there was still unanswered questions from Dante, and the narrative with Dante was he's the Drew Aller. He can't play in big moments. He crumbles under pressure. He makes bad mistakes at bad times, so on and so forth. And he's got flashes of greatness or whatever. So that was sort of the narrative based on UCLA about Dante. So those were questions too going into it. And then as the season started, Oregon played some cupcakes and Penn State played some cupcakes. And Penn State sort of handled business with their cupcakes and Oregon handled their business. And the thing too with Oklahoma State in particular was Oklahoma State probably years ago when they were scheduled, they weren't expected to be that type of cupcake. So the idea obviously was still to present a challenge, but it just didn't turn out that way, and Oregon ended up playing cupcakes leading up to this game as well. So the question still remained with Oregon because there's guys that have not been tested coming out of high school yet. The last big test was probably these players' high school state championships. They haven't been tested in college yet. And you had Dante Moore, who had been lightly tested at one point and didn't play as well as he could have. And now is the real test. Real test. So naturally, people leaned Penn State because they also had that. They had a home game. It was a whiteout. Everything on the outside front was in their favor. Within the roster, the environment, the home game. They didn't have to travel either. Everything was advantageous to Penn State. And so people leaned towards them, and I did included. I mean, a lot of Duck fans were like, well, if the Oregon doesn't go undefeated this season, it'll probably be a 10-2 and one of the 10-2, 11-1, and one of those losses are going to be Penn State. Because also you also got to sort of give your young that leash that they're going to sort of make mistakes. They're going to make young player mistakes, and likely those young player mistakes will usually, unfortunately, happen in big games. Because that's where they're tested and they face the biggest resistance and they have to push harder. And that just naturally leads to more mistakes. But that didn't prove the case on Saturday. And all the issues that we had with the run game, they played very well. But we'll get to that just in a little bit. We're going to take it piece by piece because there's a lot to cover. Just in general. I mean, your uncle wasn't lying when he said you can go 10 years without anything happening. You could have 10 years of history happen in a day. And that's not in the context of history, but just in the college football landscape and within the Oregon football landscape. A lot happened on Saturday. So we'll start first and foremost with Dante Moore in general. Dante Moore is many of the reasons why I named this episode what I did, Standards and Statements. Because Dante Moore made a statement this game. And it was natural that he was emotional and tearing up after this game, because it wasn't just an amalgamation of his time at Oregon, but his journey as a whole. And I know some people say this is sort of Dan Lanning's magnum opus game. I don't think so. But for now, this is Dante Moore's. And I think there's more obviously left in that take with Dante Moore. There's more, if you will. Dante Moore was insane. And I'm not talking about putting up 500 yards and 6 TD game. But insane in the sense that, one, he did have a good statistical game. He threw for about 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. And was incomplete on only 10 passes. But in a game like this, he's not going to be 39 for 39. That's just not going to happen. It was insane because, one, he had those stats that was reflective of his performance, but I have never seen, at least in an Oregon quarterback in particular, but a college football quarterback in general. I mean, I can't really think of the last college football quarterback. A lot of people are making comparisons to Mariota. I would probably agree with that in terms of Dante Moore's poise in this game. I think that this was probably... Here's what I'll say. Mariota would have been the same way against Penn State as Dante Moore was against Penn State in terms of his poise. I just don't think that Mariota played as hostile of a crowd as Moore did on Saturday. Doesn't mean that Mariota wouldn't be that way. Just saying that despite me also being a Pac-12, fan my whole life and stuff, and I give credit to the Pac-12 crowds, the environment at Penn State was probably more hostile than anything outside of Autzen or Seattle Husky Stadium, even though they didn't really do much crowd-wise against Ohio State this last Saturday. Outside of that, though, probably the most hostile crowd that Oregon players have probably ever played. And Dante Moore had that opportunity. Mariota just didn't have that opportunity. Mariota probably would have acted the same way, but he just never had the chance. I've probably spent too much time on that point saying that, but I think you understand my point. Dante Moore did not flinch. I swear he was like, a pro wrestler not selling moves. Or a boxer getting hit in the face and just... There was one shot of him I saw on the broadcast. This was towards the end of the game, I believe, one of the last drives, if not the last drive. And you remember that meme of that Baylor player? I think his name was Sean Oakman, the guy that was lied about and falsely accused of SA for the YouTube censors, and basically had his pro career ruined. His NFL career ruined. But when he played for Baylor, he was just he is, but at that time too, he was a just absolute unit. And he was just, stand up straight up, robotic. Everyone kind of likened him to sort of a Terminator type guy. And Dante Moore had that same posture, just not moving. Everything around him was going crazy. Looking straight ahead, helmet on. Not flinching at all. And it showed in the game because he didn't get scared in the pocket. If he got flushed out of the pocket, he just left and found a spot, took what the defense gave him. Didn't make any super terrible decisions. There was one throw at the beginning that he got lucky on that really was more DeCorian Moore letting the ball get through his hands than anything, Dante did. But DeCorian ended up catching it still and avoiding that. And the 2-point conversion interception doesn't count towards his stats. And that, again, is you are having to finish the play. You have to figure out a way to get that 2-point conversion in double overtime. So I don't usually, give a demerit to quarterbacks that might throw a pick during situations like that, because it's like you're all clumped in the end zone and you're sort of playing backyard football if the play doesn't convert right away. You're just sort of running around in the backyard trying to find someone open and hoping for the best. So that wasn't really a mark against him in any way on that front. But so Dante Moore, though, had an absolutely incredible game on that front. The crowd didn't faze him. Nothing really fazed him whatsoever. He managed the game super well and made plays when he needed to make plays. And he didn't, wince when he got, dinged up on a hit or something. He just got up, next play, let's roll. So that, to me, again, I've been saying for so long, how many of you know I've been saying for a long time that his decision to return to Oregon and the reasons why he decided to return to Oregon says a lot about his mentality and his character as a person. And that showed against Penn State in the way he handled himself that game. And I'm very happy to see it. And I'm very happy that obviously we got the result that we got. And he played fantastically. And that's really all I guess I got to say about Dante Moore on that front. DeCorian Moore, redshirt true freshman, coming off straight out of Duncanville, Texas, right onto the field, straight out of high school. He is the age of a lot of these players on the roster in terms of playing time and chronological age. This is obviously where the questions came in for Oregon. How will these young guys handle this type of environment and this type of game? And DeCorian answered the question. I think he had like 89 yards or something. He had himself a day. He was a big part of a huge 4th down conversion. And he displayed everything that was needed for someone who was a 5-star plus athlete coming out of high school. And he didn't let Dan Lanning said this, and this is the perfect thing. I wish coaches around my time playing had this same platitude in their back pocket. They said similar things, but not as eloquently as this. You play the game, not the occasion. And that's exactly what every Duck player, and especially the young guys who were the big question marks in that front, did. DeCorian Moore had a great game. Kenyon Sadiq, another great game. He was very key on short yardage situations. He blocked his ass off like normal. He made big plays when they needed to be made in the sense of getting key first downs off of 3rd and 4th down conversions. And although here, Kenyon Sadiq didn't make any sort of wow plays, he still got his sort of gamely tradition of a hurdle in towards the front of the game. It wasn't as flashy, if you will, as the one in the Big Ten championship last year against Penn State, but he still got it in, and it's still fun. I was really hoping to see that happen, and he made it happen. This was not Kenyon Sadiq's most flashy performance, but is one of his better performances, and that's because he was, as a tight end, he was there. He was where he exactly needed to be, and he was where Dante needed him to be, and he made plays that along the theme of Dan Lanning this week was 1,000 cuts. He was many of those cuts, and that is all you can ask for in a solid tight end. Because here's the thing, overall this game was 3-3 at half. And I wasn't surprised by it, and I wasn't panicking about it, because this is the type of game that is always sort of going to be. I think the Big Ten championship game where Penn State were trying to play Oregon in a shootout last year was sort of an aberration. And this was more likely the game that we were all kind of expecting the Big Ten championship game to be last year. A heavyweight bout, a championship fight. And you don't come out of the gate flailing fists during those fights. Sometimes it starts a little slow. You take a few rounds to telegraph some stuff. How does this person throw a punch? What's this person trying to go for in terms of their punch combos? How are they moving? How is their footwork? All sorts of things. Sometimes you're just getting a feel for your opponent. And after that, then you're trading punches. You might get hit a few times hard. But you don't back down. You reset. You try to throw your own punches. And you'll connect too. The idea, again, 1,000 cuts. Just connect. Connect, connect, connect. That's all you need to do. You don't need to go for the home run every time. It's small ball baseball. And this was one of the reasons why everyone thought that Oregon wasn't going to cut it in the Big Ten in the first place. For some reason, they didn't think that about USC, UCLA, or Washington. Because obviously there's this sort of narrative surrounding Oregon, most likely from the Chip Kelly days, that, it was just all juke and dancing and patty cake blocking and finesse. They can't play in the trenches. They don't have the size or the tenacity or the mental fortitude to do it. Little did they know that one Cristobal was building offensive and defensive line first team, and then Dan Lanning took that and put it on steroids. And despite the young age of the team that Oregon has, they have the roster that Dan Lanning is building. So here is why, though, Oregon, aside from defying the stereotype about them, why they're a much better team, I think, than even a lot of Duck fans, myself included, thought they could be. Because back in the Chip Kelly days, if you took Oregon out of a shootout game, you had a pretty good chance of beating them. If you played a shootout game, you couldn't catch up. So obviously you saw with teams like Stanford back in the day, and then you saw somebody like Northwestern and Oregon State attempt it this year, thinking that was the same strategy 10, 15 years ago, was slow the ball down, keep the ball out of the offense's hands. Oregon will get jumpy because they don't have the ball on offense. Slow the game down, run the ball, make it a low-scoring slugfest of a game. Well, Oregon has built themselves the ability to not only play in a shootout game, they sort of kept that shootout game side of them, but they built their size and speed to also say, hey, you're going to take us into a slugfest? Well, we can throw a few haymakers ourselves. So you know what? We're going to go under center. We're going to have jumbo packages. We're going to run the ball straight down the field, and we're going to eat some time off the clock. So that's what you saw sort of in the first half. And the reason why it was 3-3. Because Penn State was sort of trying to make that a game like that, and Oregon says, okay, let's do it. And unfortunately, the offense sort of on Oregon's side struggled a little bit in the first half. It seemed like once they got to Penn State's 40-yard line, they struggled to get it any farther. And they would drive, and they just couldn't finish drives. And I think it was maybe towards the end of the first half, and maybe actually the beginning of the second half, that Oregon even got into the red zone. It was just one of those games. It's a field position game. And Oregon, though, was able to play that game. And a lot of it, though, had to do with the defensive side. And I know we all had issues with the Ducks' ability to play the run. And especially last year, Penn State and their fans were sort of banking on the fact that Katron Allen and Nick Singleton ran for 300 yards in the Big Ten championship game. And I think that's why everyone expected a shootout like that. But here's the thing, though. Number one, Tosh probably called the best defensive game that he's ever called so far on Saturday. And I think it was sort of a Jim Knowles, Ryan Day situation where Lanning was probably being a little more outspoken with his calls because he wanted to make sure that 300 yards rushing wasn't going to happen again. And it didn't, by the way. I think they barely got over 100 yards rushing. Fantastic game stopping the run. Again, the standard has been set for what a Tosh Lupoi defense looks like. The thing, though, is consistency. So this is a big... Honestly, this is probably Tosh Lupoi's magnum opus over Dan Lanning's. And that's because this was probably the best defensive performance that he's had against the better teams that he's played. So first year, he and Lanning were on the scene. They always play good defense, except against teams like Washington, who with how good Washington was at the time. 2023, same thing. And in 2022, Beavers were able to come back and win that freaking Civil War game because they couldn't stop the run in the second half and they got too lazy. That's another issue that we'll talk about later for this game. 2023, it was Washington. 2024, it was a Washington problem. 2023, it was a Washington problem. 2024, it was Boise State. Ashton Jeanty again. Jeanty's he's a generational talent at Boise State, and the best way to beat him was to contain him. You weren't going to get him -5 yards on the day, I guess, unless you're in the NFL, but even he now is going over 100 yards rushing in the NFL. I think he's found his groove. It probably took him a little bit, but he's found his groove. Ashton Jeanty, though, at Boise, containing him also was giving up 150 yards rushing. He was just unstoppable. But, again, Oregon struggled against the run against that team. They struggled against the run against Ohio State, especially in the Rose Bowl, and they struggled against Penn State. The top-tier teams, they struggled against the run. Despite all the other times that they did well against the run against the inferior teams, the equal to superior teams, they struggled against the run. And the only reason why they were in the game in the regular season, they were in the game enough to beat Ohio State that game, was because they were able to at least contain enough of the run. But still, even then, they couldn't really stop the run. So this is huge for Tosh in the sense that finally you have a top 10 team that you went up against and you were able to stop the run. That is huge. So now, though, the standard for Tosh has been set. The rest is consistency. And we'll keep going forward. I'm just going to take a quick break. I'm getting a very important phone call, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. sorry about that. Phone call over. Now back to the show. So, yes, defense played extremely well against the run, and defied, I think, everybody's expectations on that. And part of it, though, had to do with stellar performances by guys like Bear Alexander. And this is the result of guys who came under the Nick Saban tree, if you will, and the Kirby Smart tree, like Dan Lanning. Because obviously, don't know why my camera went out for a second there. Obviously, Bear Alexander has had some issues sticking around with programs, and a lot of it had to do with a mentality thing. And sometimes a lot of that mentality thing has to do with coaching. And sometimes it's not even whether or not the coach is good or not. It has to do with... Why does my camera keep going out? Let me replug. Sorry about that, folks. All right, can you stay like that? Can you stay like that? Okay. A lot of it has to do with just not the talent or abilities of a coach, but just matching. Doesn't seem like a great fit with coach and player. And Saban and Kirby Smart would always sort of take these project guys, kind of like kind of like a lot of JUCO coaches, where they always have to take sort of the project guys and rebuild them into the D1 superstar they're always meant to be. And so Saban and Kirby Smart take those chances. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes it does, and it pays off dividends. So that's why I think Lanning was willing to give Bear Alexander a third chance to say, look, take a deep breath. Deep breath over. All right, I want you to lock in, and I'm going to make you lock in. This is your last stop. If you don't make it through here, you won't get to the NFL. If you do, you'll make it to the NFL. So let's get you to your ceiling. And again, the idea is that the Ducks lived up to the moment in this moment, because Bear Alexander was there the first few games, but this was the game we really needed somebody on just every player on the team to show up and play, and he showed up and played. He was there as a menace to stop everything in the middle. He was a big part of stopping the run. He would eat blocks. He would get in the backfield. He would disrupt those plays and be a 1-2 punch next to Amari Washington, who is just an absolute animal. And he had an amazing animal game. And so this was the breakout game, I think, for Bear Alexander. Business as usual for Amari Washington. And on the edges, we had the same sort of dynamic. Mateo, it was business as usual. He was getting beyond the line of scrimmage. He was rushing. He was getting Drew Aller. Oregon had 18 pressures of Drew Aller through 25 passes. That is freaking insane performance from the D-line and the front seven in general. One thing I've noticed, and I think it's a big shout out to Big Dave Uyunglele, Mateo's father, is Dave is big on building and building and building, and especially obviously with his sons and their play. Last year, I think a lot of the reasons why Oregon struggled a little bit against the run was because Mateo was too big, strong, and fast. And he was sort of a raw talent that had to sort of be developed, in the sense that he is an amazing, incredible pass rusher. But obviously sometimes he's too big, fast, and strong passing the rush that he's out of position on run plays. And you kind of notice that in the Big Ten championship and other games, that a lot of times if teams would have success on the run, they'd be running on Mateo's side. And that's because they would run off tackle, and Mateo was already blowing past everyone on the edge. Often. Not saying it was necessarily a thing, but the coaches, and then Big Dave in particular, who obviously likes to take, do social media stuff with all his players and his sons and his families and nephews and cousins, all those people, and do like social media training videos. But I think Big Dave also, he took his son to train the difference in pass rush and run stop. And I'm sure the Oregon coaches are developing that too, and it's showing this year. He might not break the sack record, and get up to 13 this season, but if it's to stop the run, that is a welcome trade-off, I think, for the team. And who knows? He's that good. He could just do it. He could break the record and just be an amazing run stopper and be the one of, if not the best D end or defensive tackle basically since Haloti Ngata. You know what I mean? Like it's very plausible. But Mateo's doing the work to make that happen. He's putting in the work and putting in the training. His dad's helping him. Shout out to Big Dave. His coaches are helping him. Shout out to them too. And the player on the other side that I thought was going to have a breakout season this year, number one, so far he's having a breakout season this year. In this game in particular, he had his breakout game, in that he was making plays almost every play, and it's one thing to have a breakout season against inferior competition, and it's another thing to have a breakout season against every competition, including superior or equal, and that is Tatum Tuioti. He made a huge play where he was going after Drew Aller. Drew Aller scrambles to the outside. He stops in the middle of the play, recalculates his pursuit angle because he was starting to get beat on the inside, and Drew Aller was going up and around. He stops, busts ass to the sidelines, and cuts off that route and gets a huge sack in that game to keep. I think it led obviously to a Penn State punt. So Tuioti had an amazing game. The boundary corners, Ife Obadegwu, Brandon Finney, both freshmen. Extreme talents. Again, not really tested yet. This was going to be their test. They had basically no stats. That is the biggest compliment you could ever get for a boundary corner. No stats. Or not many if there are. That is crazy. With the upgrade in receivers, the wideouts that Penn State thought they had, they were non-factors basically in that entire game until the end, basically. And that was of no fault of the corners. Now I found them to be sort of out of position occasionally on sort of jet sweep style runs. But again, you're going to get that with good talent that's blocking you. And Finney and Iffy are both still great run stopping secondary people, members too. They're good at getting off their blocks and blowing up screen plays and things like that, toss plays, so on and so forth. So even if they're out of position on a couple plays, it doesn't take away from their performance. So there's that. Flowers. Oh my gosh. He is so fast. So fast. There was a run at a pretty key moment, I think, in the game that I think last year would have been a big run, would have broken for a big run, Penn State. And that play only went 4 yards because of Flowers. He was so freaking fast. He got right up to it, made a great open field tackle, and again, stalling the drive, slowing it down, not getting your jugular cut, just a tiny cut on that analogy with Dan Lanning. Flowers played great. And, of course, there's Thieneman, who, oh, my gosh, he is just he is the most well-rounded safety I haven't seen in a long time in college football and nearly ever seen at Oregon. And Oregon's had some elite secondaries, so it's really hard to even say that. But not only did he get the game-winning interception in double overtime, he was a run stopper. I mean, I've never seen a safety like him be both a run stopper and a coverage guy. He covers so much ground. His coverage radius is basically the whole field. He played incredible too. So the defense as a unit had a great game this game. They held Drew Aller to like 140 yards passing with one pick and one touchdown. They had the one busted coverage on that touchdown. But again, that's going to happen, especially in games like that, in a young crew like that. That's going to happen. Luckily, it wasn't. It almost was a game breaker, but it wasn't a game breaker, and that's all you can ask for. So one mark against Oregon's defense, though, and this is a sort of lesson learned, and again, this is the growing experience of a young roster. However, I think Oregon kind of had an issue with this last year, but this one is a great experience, and luckily you didn't come out with a loss learning this lesson. That is the best case scenario you can have. Because late in the fourth quarter, it was 17-3. The game looked all but over at this point with how dominant Oregon was on both sides of the ball. They could stall out or they could run out the clock on offense, and they can get stops on defense. But then they didn't. And by the end of the game, Penn State ties it up at 17 and sends it to overtime. And that long bomb busted coverage made it 17-10, and it broke the dam a little bit on Penn State's offense, and they started rolling. The problem is the lesson learned here is the Oregon defense. This is now getting older. You know what I mean? They're young, but now this is a getting older moment and wiser. Just because you're up 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter doesn't mean the game is over. And this was where I thought Penn State might exercise the demon finally. But little did I know that was part of the demon. They always, come back and give the other team a scare and make them think, wow, we just choked this game away. And then at the last second, they do it instead. So apparently that's part of the process, according to some Ohio State fans on the internet. But yes, busted coverage. Didn't play that very well. Led to a touchdown because they were coasting. And especially, it's sort of paradoxical, obviously, because you think you can let up a little bit on defense, but not with a cornered animal like Penn State. Because here's the thing. This is also what I would have said pre-game, before the game. I'm saying it now. The pressure is on Penn State to win this game much more than Oregon. Oregon has a new squad. They're sort of assumed to be a dip year. It's not a rebuild year. It's not necessarily a reload year. But versus last year, you kind of think, they're probably not going to go 13-0. They're going against Penn State that has all their team here ready to go, ready to win a national championship and get some monkeys off their back. You kind of assume there's going to be enough of a dip with Oregon that Penn State is favored. It's at home, at a whiteout. Everything is in their advantage. With a big national championship push, Penn State had all the pressure to win this game. Oregon had none of it, and that's probably helped them in the game too, just playing loose and calm. Because it's like, people are expecting us to lose this game, and it's very probable we might. I mean, we should if Penn State's that good. So they had no pressure, even as the number 6 team in the country, and everyone sort of thinking that some people, hyping them up or whatever. There's still no pressure. Penn State has all the pressure. So when Penn State gets in the situation with the fire James Franklin chants going about, down 17-3, they're a wounded animal in a corner. They're going to fight back. And especially once you finally, after battling, you finally build up a 14-point lead, that is the exact opposite time to let up. And Oregon did. And they let a quick touchdown go. If that touchdown took a long time to get, okay, whatever. This is a slugfest. They got their punch in. But with how quick they did, Penn State was way back in this game. And then they got back in the game by sending it to overtime. And then Penn State gets a lead in the first overtime. And the second overtime, holy cow. Again, talking about Dante Moore, that amazing throw to Gary Bryant Jr. to win that game, to go ahead back and finally. Miss a 2-point conversion, then Thieneman gets a pick, missed 2-point conversion, doesn't matter. But that step and throw, to make that throw, that was a laser in a clutch moment, was just incredible. And that was probably due to the fact that Penn State had all the pressure to win that game. Once again, I'm getting another important phone call, so I'm going to go ahead and take another quick break. I will be right back. And my mouse isn't working. Back to it.
far sideline. Touchdown, Oregon!
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. See, I'm not lying. I'm not lying and pretending that I'm busy. I really am. I'm really trying. Jeez. Anyway. Let me go ahead and turn on the big screen again, if you will. All right, where were we? Oh, yeah, the beautiful double overtime throw by Dante Moore to Gary Bryant Jr., who also had a great game. He was clutch in many moments, too. Very clutch. Need that veteran status, type of guy that knows what he needs to do to win. Even though it doesn't seem like we necessarily have that problem with the younger guys anyway. However, it just never... Imagine Evan Stewart on this team right now and how much of a bummer it is that he's injured. I mean, come on. Whoo! That would just be beautiful stuff right there. Yeah. So, Penn State had more pressure to win this game. So even with a 14-point deficit, they never really got anything going on offense in the all the way up till the fourth quarter. They're still going to play like a caged animal trying to get out. And they came back ferociously where once the second it got to overtime, I was like, crap, Oregon just gave this game away. This is it. Then they scored in overtime, and then it was like, well, there it is. Was expected. You had all that momentum on their side. And that just says a lot, too, that not only did the young team learn to let this, not to let the game go like that, to close games, but then they learned that the game's not over. These are two massive lessons that they learned, and they were able to learn this with a win. That is great, a great sign for this team. The fact that, and here's the thing, Oregon, and I say this with this stat here, apparently Oregon, Dan Lanning in particular, has more top 10 wins now at Oregon than James Franklin does. So, sure, they had a monkey on their back with Washington, and got dog walked in the Rose Bowl, but it's not necessarily the same situation. Like, there are big games that Oregon are capable of winning. There's just certain games that they still struggled with or whatever, and we'll see if they can keep building on the Washington win from last year against Washington this year. But it's not like Dan Lanning is big game Dan, you know what I mean? Like James Franklin. So it's not, I know or people who don't like Oregon like to push this BS narrative that, oh, they can't win the big game or whatever type of shit. Sure, they can't win some of them, but they haven't lost all of them either, or most of them. These are building blocks. Sometimes your building blocks might break or fall off the wall, and you have to put it back up. So it's that type of thing. I think Oregon obviously got their reputation from their past where anytime they got in a bigger game, if it was a big regular season game or a bowl game, whatever, they were always outmatched. Because, again, in the 90s, they were finally starting to get ground and get to bowl games and play the Rose Bowl against Penn State. They were outmatched against Penn State that year because they didn't have the talent recruited. And the 2001 team was special. They had the talent. Let me redo the focus here. There we go. They had the talent in 2001. That was probably the most complete team that they've ever had in 2001, which is why everyone thought they should have played Miami in the national championship game that year. And even then, They had like 17 NFL guys in Miami that year. So they still would have been outmatched in that game. They probably had they probably would have lost that game, but that would have broke that glass ceiling like 10 years earlier for Oregon. So all those games that sort of big games that sort of happened since then, Oregon either were making 3 stars overperform against 5 stars, or it was Chip Kelly's system where it was we're undersized but we're gonna out scheme you type of stuff. The Dan Lanning era, it's not so much. They're built for big games, so obviously they're not going to win them all. And I mean, Kirby Smart struggles against Alabama, but even then, it still didn't stop them from getting national championships. So that's one thing for Penn State to maybe think about, especially after thinking about Ohio State's last season, is how do you handle this loss? Because with the loss to Oregon, Ohio State thought they should have beat us that game anyway, so they're like, nah, whatever. They sort of proved it in the Rose Bowl. They lost to Michigan. Obviously, it's Michigan, and that was the moment that they really had a come-to-Jesus moment about their season. And they made it to the playoffs, and they got hot in the playoffs. They had again, always, it's just make sure you're on a heater in the playoffs. Play your regular season to get to the playoffs, but make sure you're playing your absolute peak football in the playoffs. Because that's what happened. Oregon was playing their best football earlier in the season, and they were starting to play their worst football later in the season. And Ohio State was playing their best football in the playoffs. And that's what happens, though, when you get on a heater in the playoffs. So Penn State has this fork in the road right now after this loss that they play Ohio State as sort of the next big game, and this one is a bigger hurdle, I think, than Oregon. Not much bigger, but bigger. So now they're really staring down the barrel of a 10-2 season and maybe not even a chance to win the conference. And again, they could still beat Ohio State. It's still possible. But I'm just saying, they're in the same fork in the road as Ohio State. If they really think they are a national championship winning team like Ohio State last year, they are in the same fork in the road right now. Will they crumble and cave and just give up? Or will they have their come to Jesus moment and regroup and become a buzzsaw? And it might benefit them now to have this decision now and not have a bad loss to get them there. Granted, if it's the same result, then it's the same result. Who cares? But that is the decision that Penn State is having to make right now. And I know all the fans are like, give up. But that's why they're fans and not players. And so this isn't necessarily a bad loss for Penn State, despite all that pressure, despite everything in their advantage and everything else. But that's the lesson that they should be taking. Oregon has the best case scenario of the lessons that they took, and that is close games on defense. Don't just play well enough to get ahead and then coast. Play well the full 4 quarters. And frankly, after that first quick touchdown and the offense getting off the field and Penn State's offense starting to drive again to tie it up, if I was Dan Lanning, I know you don't want to waste timeouts, but I would have called timeout just to kill the momentum. Just be like, you know what? Timeout. We need to stop this offense for now. And I need to fucking chew out my players and get them fired up and ready to go again. But again, best case scenario of a learning experience for Oregon on that front. In Penn State, you got a fork in the road from here on out. What are you going to do moving forward this season? Because the season's not going to stop because you lost. And I know everyone sort of thinks the world revolves around them and their fandom and also their team. But it doesn't. The season's going to move on without you if you quit. And so this is the decision and the hope that you have as a Penn State fan, that this is James Franklin's Ryan Day moment, that this was the wake-up call / become the buzzsaw moment, and you run the table from here on out. Or, you have a bad loss that doesn't kick you out of the playoffs, and you become a buzzsaw from there on out. But this is the moment. And it was a great game. Came down to a last second, or not a last second, but just a last play interception by Dylan Thieneman. He just made the play. So moving forward, though, for Oregon is sort of unfortunate, because now we're swimming into a pool of rat poison. And as Saban says, the rat poison, where I sometimes don't understand media members. I really don't. And I think it's been maximized by the era of the internet, because everyone acts like a starving homeless person that just found a pizza. You know what I mean? They find one thing and they're like, I'm going to consume all of it. There's no moderation. It's just all or nothing. And they got to say the craziest shit or the most jump the gun shit you could ever think of, because they think these are the people I call hot take merchants, because these are the people that think, saying this or doing this or jumping on this bandwagon, jumping on this wave is going to get them the most clicks and the most eyes and whatever. And maybe the reason why it's so epidemic levels is because it works. Who knows? But obviously now that Oregon beat Penn State, and one, if you actually watch the game that's playing right here, if you actually watch the game and not the box score, you notice Oregon had control of the game, mostly, except for a few key minutes. But they took control right back when they needed to. And gritting out a win like that is the second lesson on that one. But if you actually watch the game, you'll see Oregon control most of this game. So now, obviously, everyone's like, well, is Oregon the best team in the country? Oregon's got to be number one, right? Oh, no, they're number two. Poll watching. Now they're poll watching again. And the poll watching is just getting worse and worse and worse, especially as the weeks go by and the more that they win. Here's the thing. Again, I've probably said this way too many times. You're probably sick of hearing it. Maybe if you're too sick of hearing it, we'll put it on a t-shirt. Especially after the AP gate of where one AP poll voter, she said, oh, it's just, I saw the box score and I voted blah, blah, blah. I barely paid attention. I just went by the name or whatever. I put Florida over USF, and she didn't even know that they lost the game, or vice versa. I can't remember which team won. It's been a while. But she put a team that lost ahead of the team that beat them, is basically what happened. She wasn't paying attention. So the AP doesn't really have any credibility anymore either, if we're being honest. And because it's full of these people that soak up the hype like a sponge, and they vote based on their reaction to the hype. And I was happy with where Oregon was at the beginning of this season, really flying under the radar. I even saw online people be like, hey, no one's really talking about Oregon this season. What's up over there? What's going on over there? No one's really talking about them. What are they up to? Well, now we're seeing what they're up to. And granted, if you have great teams, you're going to have to withstand the hype and the media and stuff like that. But it's really hard. It's much harder, I feel like, now, because you literally have from every corner, everywhere, everyone's media people, and I've been a media person, okay? This is how I know, all right? Media people, they will not stop pushing the issue. If you have a bruise, they will keep pushing it. So, like, even if it's like, hey, shut the hell up, I'm playing the game, I don't really care about your stupid question about watching the polls, they'll be like, well, why not? What about, or they'll figure out another way to ask the question. So now everyone's, is Oregon the best team in the country? Is Oregon that? Okay, they made a great case, sure, but no, I still think everything goes through Ohio State this season. They're defending national champions. They haven't played necessarily to their standard, potentially. A lot of people think Julian Sayin is being nerfed, and frankly, that makes me more concerned than anything because they'll probably de-nerf him come postseason. Kind of like they did, everywhere else last year on the Ohio State team. They cut him real loose. They were a little micromanagey over the course of the season, which is why they took losses. And then in the playoffs, it was like, nah, you guys go play. We'll scheme out. You guys go play. And so that is sort of my concern right now with Ohio State, that let's say we don't have the stupid playoff seeding of last year, and we play our first playoff game against Ohio State, who was seeded in a particular way because of their performance or whatever in the regular season. Let's say that Oregon does go on a playoff run and go to the national championship game. At this point, it seems likely it would be against Ohio State because they're that type of team that has the strategy down where you get hot at the right time. And Julian Sayin is perfectly capable. Again, I've seen him in person. I've seen him play in person. And we saw exactly why Nick Saban wanted him in the beginning. He may not look big out there, but he's got an arm on him. He can sling the ball and make plays. So I'm just saying, I don't think we've seen Ohio State full capacity yet. At least, especially the offense. Because, look, their win over Texas is a win over Texas at this point, not because they beat the number one team in the country, which is kind of crazy to think right now that they were the number one team in the country. But Texas has a very, 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 very good defense that kept them in the game. And guess what? Ohio State has the best red zone defense I've seen this year, easily. I don't think I've seen one score. I've seen like 2-3 games of theirs, and I haven't seen one score of them in the defense in the red zone. Like they've gone, I guess, bend but don't break, but not really. But like against Texas, again, like the Texas and Arch Manning or whatever couldn't really finish drives because their red zone defense was so crazy. And I think that they got an upgrade with Matt Patricia as the defensive coordinator from Jim Knowles. Even though Jim Knowles obviously is a crazy good defensive coordinator. But Matt Patricia coming in, I think, was just an upgrade from there. Like, their defense has got to be top 3, if not the top defense in the country. And that's going to carry them. Like I said, there's endless proof every single year that all the fun, flashy runs and offense is fun to look at, but defense always wins championships. It is always the deciding factor of winning and losing games is defense. You could have, I mean, how many Colorado games have you seen? It's like, those types of teams where quarterback throws for 600 yards. Any other team, that would have been an absolute blowout, blow your back out beatdown. But somehow the team loses because they have a defense on the other side that can't stop a nosebleed and they score 60 points and give up 65 points or whatever. Like in the old days of the Pac-12 After Dark type of stuff. So you can get, with the defense that Ohio State has, they can give Ohio State's offense to get enough time to gel. And unfortunately, I think it's timing right that they're going to gel late in the season when it counts the most. So I would not be surprised if, let's say, Oregon somehow pulls out a playoff run where they get in the national championship. It still might be against Ohio State. Or if they're in similar enough brackets where they meet in the semifinals to get to the national championship game, it would be against Ohio State. And honestly, if you could get past Ohio State in the playoffs, at this point, you're probably the person that's going to win it all. And I understand teams like Alabama and such are having a good year this year. I'm not discounting or discrediting what they're doing this season or their potential this season. But all I'm saying is, as it stands right now, all roads lead through Ohio State, and the only way out from them is through. So that's also why Penn State is a bit of trouble. So is Oregon the best team in the country right now? I think all things considered, they've probably had the best win so far. Maybe less so against the competition, because Ohio State might have a better win against Texas. Not might, more likely, than against Penn State. And really, if Penn State doesn't play well against Ohio State or win, then our win over them looks way worse. But I just say, with the amalgamation or the sum of the parts of the environment, the type of pageantry that created the big game that it was, the team, the type of game, the slugfest, and the absolute mental fortitude to will that game to a win from especially a young team. Yes, and the standard that they reach to, and I'm sure that's still not even Oregon's standard that they want to play at. But all things considered in that front, sure, yeah, I would say it's not a crazy thing to say that they've had the biggest win so far this season. But that also doesn't mean that they're the best team in the country yet. I'm going to say that because I know I got a lot of delusional homers that say Oregon's number one, perfect all time in all ways. Again, you're more than free to think that, but you got to be honest at some point. So you're not shocked at the results of a Rose Bowl loss or a national championship loss or whatever. Like, you think you'd want to save yourself some of the pain to practice some self-awareness. I mean, the team practices that self-awareness. Why not you? Maybe we're not the best team in the country. We're one of the best, but we're not the best. Well, let's play to be the best. That's what the team is telling themselves in the locker room. But you can't, as a fan, can't handle that if that's what you're being told. Some of you, I should say. The irrational ones. Everyone else obviously is great. I'm a Duck fan, dyed-in-the-wool Duck fan through and through for years. It's been my community for almost 30 years now. But I'm painting you a visual here. So do I think Oregon is the best team in the country? It can be argued, but I lean towards not yet or no. And here's the thing. This is the big problem that I have with, again, like the media and everything, because they're the ones making this question. No one else would be saying this if it weren't for them. Oh, my God, they're the best team in the country. Oh, are they the best team in the country? Blah, blah, blah. They just pick something and run with it. And then everyone else does because they don't want to have FOMO, or it's an effort to make that analysis. And of course, I understand why the question comes up in this regard, in this circumstance. But again, it's the difference between having a beer with dinner and a 12-pack on an empty stomach. You can't just full send it all the time. You got to think it through a little bit. You can't just and Dante Moore is the Heisman frontrunner, which I think he should have been higher in the Heisman rankings from the get-go. So I think it's a little more rational or whatever to say, the Heisman race should be, he should have had his hat in the ring for a while now and sort of moving up the ranks. Certainly more than saying, oh, yeah, this is the Ducks' year to win a national championship. For sure. Because Dante Moore has proved that, obviously, since the season started. And then he really proved that against Penn State. Because he came in there and just said, you don't make me afraid at all. I got blue raspberry icy in these veins. Ice cold. Don't give a crap what you got to yell at me. Don't care. I'm too busy throwing touchdowns. So, yeah, that hype I think is good. But that's because Dante didn't have hype from the get-go. He should definitely be getting some hype. And I hope that he plays well the rest of the season and makes it to New York. Again, I don't want to see a complacency problem. But this is a way better standard set than the previous weeks, for sure. And that was the statement that we may be young, but we don't go quietly into the night. We don't just fall over because you think you're entitled to win in Happy Valley because you're supposedly who you are and got the paper championship in June. Like, no, we also pack punches. So let's fight. So that's kind of my assessment on how the media is sort of being crazy and ridiculous about this. So yet, I should say. Here's the thing. This is the thing I want everyone to sort of understand here. I'm not jaded necessarily, or pessimistic, or defiantly anti-Duck fan, as you could say, like the Aaron Fentresses and such. But I also side with some big Duck fans behind the scene. I won't really drop his name, where he's part of my documentary that will be coming out soon, hopefully. Go ahead and donate to the GoFundMe. I need more cameras, by the way, as I told you from the beginning of the game here. I lost my train of thought. Dang it. Oh, yeah, I'm not a pessimistic anti-Duck fan. Being a Duck fan, as the quote of my interviewee said, is a bludgeoning, and can be, especially coming out of the 70s and 80s era Duck teams, and then into the 90s and so on. You see the progression of the team. Well, my parents and everyone that were my parents' age were around during that terrible, terrible time. And then, of course, I became a fan like a year or two after the turnaround, because I was actually old enough to follow the game. See, I don't really count myself either. I don't say 33 years a fan, because that's how old I am. I count whenever I started actually being able to pay attention to the team and football. So 27, 28 years. So 5 or 6 years old. I was starting to catch on to what was going on as my dad was explaining it to me. My first extreme memory is the Keely Smith seasons. So I'm not that type of fan, where everything I'm saying is coming from that lens, where I'm just blindly hating Here's the thing that Penn State needs to remember. Oregon used to be that team that had endless heartbreaks. And Oregon fans this last Saturday had a lot of PTSD because they almost gave that game away. They almost let Penn State come back, tie it up, and take it away in overtime. That's why I thought we were going to end up losing that game. And why it was such a statement to me that they did not give up whatsoever. They fought back from down 7 in overtime to ended up winning by the end of the second overtime. That says a lot about this team, because every other team I've seen in the past would have been like, well, we screwed that pooch real bad. Let's just take this L and go home. And they didn't actually really fight in overtime. Or they let the momentum swing that hard that they just give it away. They wouldn't take it back, but they took it back this time. Even some of the best teams that Oregon's had couldn't pull that off before. So that is the lens that I say when I say, is Oregon the best team in the country? Not yet. Because again, there's still so much season left. We don't know how this team is going to evolve over the course of time. What I really care about is when they're ranked number 1. I don't care about September, October, November, because that doesn't matter anymore, especially when you get to because of the playoff system. Just get to the playoffs on a heater. That is all that matters. Because then what really matters is if you're number 1 in January. So who cares if they're the best team in the playoff in October 1st, September 30th? Who cares? Just keep winning games and playing to a perceived standard that your program has, and everything else will play out. Stop poll watching. Stop calling the team after a big win the greatest of all time. That goes to you, media. It's ridiculous. How many coaches had to say this rat poison line after Saban, and they're just like, yep, here's some more buckets of it. And I'm not going after the people that talk analysis of the game and things like that and ask questions based on that. But you got like the people on ESPN with the chyrons. Greatest team of all time. Oregon Ducks. Best since the 85 Bears. Type of stuff. Obviously hyperbole. I know there's a lot of you autists on the internet that are like, well, actually, no one ever said that. Yeah, obviously. It's called poetic language. But that's the thing. That's why I caveat things with, are they the best team in the country? Not yet. I'm expecting the worst, but hoping for the best. They can prove that to me as the time goes on, and most importantly, they can prove it to themselves. Because who cares when people like us in the media or whatever, who gives a shit if they think we're the best team if we think that they're the best team in the country? Do you think Dante Moore wakes up and is like on TikTok or whatever, and Stephen A. Smith is talking about Oregon being the best in the country, and he's like, giggles, I'm so glad I've been validated. No. They don't care. Because they're playing to a standard and making a statement versus those standards. And the on-field success is all that matters. And if you play to a certain standard, you will have more success. So who cares about this talk? Everyone's talking about the future. That's why everyone loves predictions and things like that. That's why I try to quell that side of me, because obviously that's just the way fandom works sometimes. You think in your head or whatever. Oh yeah, we're going to win this game 65-0, whatever. You think of that yourself, but that's not something you necessarily have to say out loud. You don't have to not, but you don't have to also. It's just it's a matter of letting the game be played. Play to the game, not the occasion. But I will say, moving forward this next week, This is the greatest time to be a Duck fan because we just came off a big win, a big travel win, and we're headed to a bye week. So now we can all sit back and relax and watch the other fans have their blood pressure spike to dangerous levels, at least for one Saturday. And then it's on to Indiana in a couple weeks, which Indiana looks pretty darn good as far as I'm concerned. This might be a tougher battle. Might be a tough battle. We're lucky that it's in Autzen, even though the last time we played Indiana, it was in Autzen and Indiana won. I remember watching that game, being super bummed. But it's a different era. And at that time in Oregon football, it was a dip year. And a dip year was a little bit more of a dip than a dip year would be today. So we will look forward to the Indiana game in a couple weeks and enjoy the bye week. I think I said all I've had to say and rant about all I've had to rant for today. And I've gone on probably for way too long, almost 2 hours. And maybe not too long in 2 hours. Hopefully you can see that I am fighting. I am in the second overtime on defense when it comes to putting up as much of these shows as possible and not skipping weeks like I did last week. You can see that on this episode as I unfortunately had to go on a break a couple times just to make some phone calls and things like that. I am hoping that the logistics of my business ventures will be much more organized in the future, where if I have phone calls, it'll be on a certain time of day and certain days and things like that. But also I get personal phone calls that are unfortunately very important right now. So there's that too. And hopefully I can re-up my inventory much quicker than I have planned. So that way, even if I have a rental that goes a little longer than the time it takes to put a show in between games, I can still put a show out in that regard. With that being said, please do everything you need to do on social media to curate your algorithm to not make you go insane and hate the world and actually see something you actually want to freaking see. Go ahead and like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and all that kind of crap, and comment your thoughts and opinions about college football in general, but definitely for Duck football in particular and mainly, because that is obviously what we're talking here mostly. But obviously, Oregon is playing college football, so they are in that conversation. So yeah, do all that cool stuff that you have to do to be able to watch my show so you can help me make money doing this. And I'm just kidding, by the way. Well, not really. But, you know, I do want this to be a fun atmosphere, obviously. But it would be fun also to be able to pay the bills doing this, and I can interact with all of you much more if I were to do that. I am rambling way too much. Thanks for watching. Do all the bull crap to follow me and, be a YouTube member that watches things on YouTube. Subscribe and all that stuff. So, yeah, with that being said, I think I'm going to head out now and call it a day. Thanks for watching.
Foot race to their sideline. Touchdown, Oregon!